I'm going to talk about higher education, work-based learning in a changing world. As we know, lifelong learning is about changing one's direction in your professional career, and I'll dwell on that mostly in terms of what work-based learning is, and how it works, how it actually presents itself as a really good way of following a lifelong learning path through higher education. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with some definitions of work-based learning in higher education. So the first one, I like this one by Gibbs and Garnett because it focuses on university work-based learning very much. And it doesn't give the much broader definitions that some people give, which can encapsulate work-based learning at other levels. We're focusing on higher education now. So it focuses on higher level critical thinking in work. Now, I have a thing about the word work seems to engender in people's minds someone going to work and earning money only. And we can't have that. It's a matter of equal opportunities and inclusion, that we consider work any kind of useful and moral activity. So it's paid or unpaid, in order to facilitate the recognition, acquisition and application of individual and collective knowledge, skills and abilities, to achieve specific outcomes which are of significance to the learner, their work, and relevant to the university. So it has to be what's relevant in terms of what universities recognise. So that aspect of people's work, the higher level learning. A similar definition by Lester and COSTLEY. It isn't really a definition, it's just extracted from that paper. And then to say that, that work-based learning has a focus upon higher education, higher level knowledge, including the acquisition and application of work-based abilities, and that the fact that it's talking about people's abilities to do things in a practice-oriented approach distinguishes it from simple work experience, which is not codified by the university and recognised as higher level learning. So work-based learning should be part of a theoretical and research-based university programme. That's what makes it work-based learning in higher education. Next slide, please. I think it's important to distinguish work-based learning from workplace learning. So we just tease this apart a bit. There's a conference about workplace learning called Researching Work and Learning. It was in Germany last year, and it's been all over the world. And so workplace learning researchers are people like Michael Arrow, Peter Sawchuk and Karen Evans. They are people that go into workplaces and research how people learn on the job. And their work is of great interest to people who are work-based learning professionals, because we're interested in how people learn on the work. But these people are mostly researchers. They are researchers who do research projects in that area, win bids to do it, and then write research reports and research papers about how people learn at work. Whereas the work-based learning community our research is into pedagogical aspects of work-based learning. We are seeking to give credit to people for their learning at work, university level acknowledgement of what they're doing. So we're mostly teachers, higher education teachers who do some research. It's that way round. And of course we draw upon the workplace learning people. And the reason I've got a bee in my bonnet about this is because as editor of a journal, I see lots of people saying that what the workplace learning researchers have done is work-based learning. Well, sometimes it is, but more often they're talking about how people are learning in the workplace. They're not talking about how they have earned higher level credit for what they're doing. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've got 3 versions of work-based learning here. The first one is what a lot of people term as work-based learning, which is full-time undergraduates who are doing a module or some kind of work placement, and they're integrating it into their degree subject. Now, in Australia, they've tidied this nomenclature up a bit, which is very convenient for us in many ways. And they've said, this is work integrated learning. And it's what all universities should be doing. If you have a bachelor's degree, then people should have some kind of work experience doing that. And it's work integrated learning. And by and large, mostly you are trying to get people to reach the learning outcomes of your subject discipline through engagement in work. So they're calling that work integrated learning. So it's not pure work-based learning, if you like, but lots of people call it work-based learning. It doesn't matter, because these terms cannot be tied down, because different people are calling them different things. Secondly, the full-time work-based learners, which are the ones I'm going to be talking about mostly, engage with university work-based learning programs. Sometimes you can do a whole program in work-based learning studies, or sometimes it will just be short courses which might get you a higher level certificate or diploma, or sometimes it will just be modules of aspects of work-based learning that they're doing. And then the third type is more like the apprenticeship module, where people have agreed with workplaces and universities that they're going to go to the university to learn, and they're also going to learn from work in the workplace, and it's already agreed outside of university kind of discussion. Next, please. So the contention about work-based learning is it cuts across the university. It's it could be transdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary knowledge that we're dealing with, or interdisciplinary knowledge. Different people conceptualize it in different ways. But the point of the matter is that not all work-based learning fits into a subject discipline. We're learning about abilities, which you might call some of them graduate skills, things like kinds of communication that you might have, problem-solving skills, and abilities to work in teams and to also work autonomously. Those kinds of things which everybody has a need to know, whatever profession that you're in. And then other things which are tying things together in a more sort of horizontal learning, as well as the in-depth learning that we all need. So that learning is, and the kind of knowledge that we're dealing with, is both horizontal and vertical. Next, please. Okay, this is just making the point, and a lot of practice theorists have talked about personal development and professional development being intertwined. We mustn't lose the fact that we are human beings embodied, and that makes, we're not just talking heads, as it were, that we're especially in the workplace. That's a very important point to make, and it impacts on higher level learning. Next, please. So Professor Derek Portwood, I think he was the first professor of work-based learning, argued that work-based learning should be regarded as a field of study within itself. It's not just a mode of learning, it's a field with lots of aspects to it, which are the same across disciplines. And such a notion allows people to create their own negotiated program in work-based learning studies. You can start by accrediting their learning from work through RPL claims. And if it itself becomes a subject, then it doesn't need to focus on a subject discipline. It's quite a radical idea for some people, but it's, you know, along a spectrum of different types of work-based learning, it's good to know what lies at the end of the spectrum. The last point here is about the handout which I sent out, which is how work-based learning in universities can be managed, all the different aspects of it. Far too much to go into in one presentation, but you might want to raise them as questions. Next, please. Okay, so what I'm going to call distinctive work-based learning is a more sort of pure version of it, if you like, is that it is with another organisation. You quite often see these sort of triangular models, don't you, about work-based learning with the student, the learner, the university, because it has to be knowledge recognised at a higher level, and the organisation, having the person who's studying at the university, quite often the employer, it often is, but it might be another stakeholder or community group, paying the fees for that particular learner if they're employed by them and they want them to develop the skills, for example. So work-based learning is underpinned by theory. If we consider it a field of learning its own right, then it has to be underpinned by theoretical knowledge, and it has to have a research basis, which after 25 years, or nearly 30 years actually, since we had work-based learning in higher education, it has begun to embed itself in this way and be taken seriously. And people are going back to the likes of Aristotle to talk about phronesis, for example, and praxis as terms which help us when we think about how to undertake work-based learning. Next, please. Right, I want to go through these quite quickly. Threshold concepts for practice that distinguish work-based learning from disciplinary knowledge, perhaps. Next, please. First of all, as I mentioned before, it's embodied. So we have people like Stephen Kemmis, who's just got a book out on practice theory, where he talks about sensibilities of people, that it's not so much about what you know, it's about how you act yourself as a person within that knowledge domain. It's very interesting read. Next, please. It's experiential and participative learning. So I think these things speak for themselves. Next, please. It's engaged. You're working with other people. You need relational skills. Higher education is not well known for its group assessments, although it's becoming more so now. It was always about the individual learner. Then we have to talk more about engagement with others. Next, please. It's situated. Everything in work-based learning depends on the context and the situation that you're in. So it's very, that's one of the key things which cuts across all forms of work-based learning, really. Next, please. It's emergent. If you're sending someone out on a placement, for example, hoping to assess them against a particular set of criteria of learning outcomes that you want, they might not learn what you want them to learn on that placement, but they might learn something else, because, and that's life, isn't it? That's how we are in work situations. We are coming up with the unexpected, and we have to be able to deal with it. Next, please. It's co-constructed. Learning by teachers with learners and learners with learners. So I think again, higher education is moving more to peer review and that kind of thing. We were doing this in work-based learning 25 years ago, negotiating activities for individuals is another element of co-construction of your own learning, taking responsibility for your own learning. Next, please. So what does a work-based learning curriculum look like? So it's inclusive of experiential learning. So many work-based learning programs have got a high degree of RPL in it, especially for lifelong learners, because we want to start people from where they are. What are these cross-cutting knowledge that they have that is transferable? And let's, as they reflect on that, on what they know, and they codify it themselves in reflective essays and things, it's a learning experience within itself to do that if it's done well. A planning is an aspect of work-based learning, and signing of learning agreements or learning contracts, sometimes they're called. You know, the ability to look forward, to map out your own learning and where you want to get to. I put research and development abilities, but at undergraduate level, sometimes people prefer to call it inquiry abilities, because the term research in universities is sometimes kept sacred for postgraduate work. But nevertheless, at undergraduate level, we're looking for people inquiring and developing their practice. So that might be as a terminology that is preferred. And then finally, and what I want to talk about next, are work-based projects. And this is the hub, the whole meaning of how you can develop yourself and your work situation, whereby people undertake an inquiry project in the work context at an appropriate level. So whether they're doing it level 4, 5, 6 or 7, depending on where they are in their learning. Next, please. So here's some examples. Features of work-based projects are that they develop, change or create a process or product in an external setting. So you're developing something in situation, but it has to be underpinned by academic knowledge and critical thinking in order for it to qualify as university level learning. It contributes to the work situation you're in and also meets the academic standards of universities, but it will involve tangible and useful outcomes. In the UK, it's all about impact now in our research excellence. And so work-based learning has always developed these projects. So when you start the project, you're looking to what the outcome of that project's going to be. So you can give recommendations in the workplace of what we should do next. Has to be ethical and sustainable. And of course, all research or change projects need to go through ethics committees. But for work-based projects, it also has to comply with ethical issues in work situations, which means, for example, there might be particular things in particular work situations that apply to them, like, for example, in education, in schools and things like that. Moves beyond disciplinary boundaries. Next slide, please. These are just some examples of master's level work-based projects that people have undertaken. So you can see the kind of things that people do when they undertake a work-based project. Next, please. Okay, so now here is a table with, what an ordinary student project might look like, a traditional one if you like, and what a work-based learning project might look like. I think, and this is drawn from the same paper that I drew the pedagogical skills handout from, if you want to look that up and read that paper, which is still very relevant, I think. Next, please. As I mentioned before, it's important to think about the outcome of the project. Some people do an executive summary, which they can then put more easily into a workplace situation, because people always want it written in a succinct way that's relevant. And then they've got the actual project with the research in it if they want to read how those outcomes were derived in terms of proper techniques of investigation within the workplace. And interesting from Aristotle at the end there, saying that when you've produced, let's say, a change project and you want to put into practice in your work situation, you also have to think about how you're going to present that to people. Are people going to want to make changes because you've done this piece of research? Get people on side. And Aristotle says it's best to be given by someone whose character everybody admires. So you might want to choose people that you work with to help you disseminate it, because these people will be the ones that people look up to. Not to mention getting managers who actually have the power to make change on side. So there's all those work-based elements to these projects as well. And the reference I've given you, that's my joke at the end. He didn't say it in 1995, but that's when the book was published. Next, please. So how do we assess these items of curriculum? These are the kind of assessment criteria that you might use to assess the outputs of students doing work-based learning. And as you can see, they're quite generic, and they would all have to be relevant to the particular project that's they've undertaken, or the particular reflective essay which they've undertaken. What you become expert at when you become a teacher of work-based learning is what a level looks like. What does level 5 look like? What kind of abilities and knowledge do people have to have in order to pass an essay or have a project which they've undertaken at level 5 as opposed to level 6? And what does it look like at level 7? That's the kind of knowledge that you need. Next slide, please. So just quickly, and this refers again to that handout, the Bowden COSTLEY paper, about what you need as a teacher of work-based learning to know about. So these are you need to know about knowledge of how things are done in a particular context in the workplace. You need to be a facilitator, really, act as a consultant. These people are experts in what they do in their workplace. You're not. You're an expert in higher education. So you have to know how to question them and how to suggest things. You have to have an awareness of transdisciplinarity, because you're looking at knowledge which doesn't necessarily fit tightly into a subject discipline, although some of it that you're looking at might do. You have to know about practice-based inquiry approaches, how to research and develop a work-based project using inquiry skills which are helpful to practice. And then you need reflexivity and reviewing skills. That's vital. Next, please. Okay, these are just the World Economic Forum top 10 skills that people in work will need in 2020. I don't know if they've updated that now. I need to check that. Next, please. And here are the references. And I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to receiving your questions.
Dear Carol, thank you very much. That was totally in the time. Great. Thank you. And also thank you, I think, for this really, I would say, grand tour through work-based learning, because I think a lot of also issues or questions from the colleagues that were stated at the beginning when they were asking, you already grasped when you were talking about. I would now maybe on the one hand ask colleagues to write in the chat, if you like, if you have questions. And also, if you give me a sign, and maybe this would be by picture and doing like this, it's easier, I think. You could also pose a question yourself. What I also, maybe I can start with that, because I think, Carol, also with your long-standing experience, and actually I think that you were involved in work-based learning from the very beginning on, when it started also in the UK to become reality within the universities. And I think one of the issue that maybe we experience also in other countries now is the obstacles or the challenges we face within the universities. And I say especially universities, not universities of applied sciences, because I think when we're talking about big research university, we have always or mostly an issue about the dealing with work, also depending, of course, in which discipline you're working in, or which discipline could change. But I was wondering, now looking back also on your experience, is what were the biggest obstacles or challenges you experienced at your university when you were dealing or when you were introducing work-based learning? Maybe you could say something on that, and meanwhile colleagues can write or give me a sign like this. Please, Carol.
Okay, yeah, interesting question, and one that we used to talk about all the time when we went to conferences and things with other universities about being misunderstood. And you kind of wish it was called something else that didn't have the term work in it, because there is, and we were all brought up with this idea that, you know, the Greeks started it, men of gold, silver and bronze, right? And so we have the academics, the vocationalists and the technicians, you know, and it doesn't make any sense when you really think about it. Nearly everyone that goes to university is going to go out to work afterwards, aren't they? So why don't they need to, you know, prepare themselves in the same way? But anyway, we're stuck with that. What we found was that some colleagues would be skeptical about this new thing. It's one of these new fads that will probably go away, and then we'll have the next thing. But if you get them involved, ask them to second supervise a project or something like that, many of them really got it and understood that it actually was about university learning, and it does employ the skills that you've got if you're a university teacher. Otherwise, I mean, why have it in universities if it doesn't employ, you know, research skills and critical thinking and all those things? What you said earlier about it's mostly applied science universities, actually I'd like to hold up as an example the University of Warwick in the UK, which is a Russell Group university, which is a top university there. And they have put a work-based learning module in every subject across the curriculum. They did a piece of research called the WEXE project, WEXHE, which is worth looking at, which they use their own university as a model, but it talks about work-based learning a lot. So it is gradually, I think University of Hull as well, another old university, and Queen's University Belfast. There are some older universities who have work-based learning in their curriculum. It's gradually coming about. Oh, some of them do an amazing thing. They have a little, so they have their main curriculum, and then they have what they used to call, what did they used to call it? Continuing education. You know, and then it became lifelong learning. And these continuing education parts might have some work-based learning in them, even at the University of Durham. And someone there told me that they have different colour gowns for the same degree. So, yes, it's interesting, but I think you'll all agree, if you've been around a long time, that these changes are taking place across the curriculum now, that people are getting themselves, what do they call it in Malaysia? Work-ready graduates, work-ready.
Thank you very much. And there are quite a lot of questions coming in now, so I would like to pick them up at this point. And I think that is something that I try to balance that a bit, but I think one of the question is this issue of reflexivity and reviewing skills in the students. I mean, we are mostly talking about work experience people who come back to university, and as we all know, it's hard to do research in your own workplace. So maybe you can say something on that.
Well, how to undertake reflexivity and reviewing skills.
And how to actually equip the students with that.
Yes, well, it's an area which not only in work-based learning, but across the curriculum is sometimes not very well taught, if you like. So I think if you're going to do it, there are some good textbooks out there that suggest how you might introduce students to reviewing and reflecting upon practice. It's almost like, you know, that research technique where you put yourself into a situation, be it participant observation, you know what I mean? That you're actually sitting there as an observer and taking note of what actually, the minutiae of what actually happens, and reflecting on why certain things have happened and why certain things are how they are. And it, you know, it can be taught, and it can be taught really well to enable people to really make the most out of what they do at work by really reflecting on how things are going and how they can be improved. So these are all higher education critical skills that we have that we can apply to real practice-based situations to really good benefit of the workplace and the thinker involved.
Thank you very much. I think one was, I think there was a question that I do not find anymore, but I think one was, and I would like to come shortly back on that. You talked about, I did not hear that especially, but you talked about horizontal and vertical learning. Could you maybe say something on that?
Okay, so what I meant by vertical learning, top-down learning, was when you go into deep learning in a subject discipline and you really drill down, which is what one hopes that people are doing when they're studying a discipline. But the horizontal learning, I suppose Basil Bernstein wrote about horizontal learning. Don't know if you know his work. He was a sociologist. And it's where you join up that disciplinary knowledge with other knowledges. You know, like Levi Strauss also had this idea of the bricolage, where you pull together things, so that I suppose that knowledge gets divided into disciplines, it gets divided into modules and gets divided into bits so that we can easily access it when we first start learning. But I think once we've accessed it and understand it, then we can let go of those boundaries and, you know, pull things together and make new knowledge out of it. So it's that kind of thinking which we kind of neglect a bit on the curriculum, because importantly, no one's saying that subject discipline knowledge isn't important. Of course it is, but we need more than that when we do our work practice. We need to actually make it work and make sense of it.
Thank you on that. I mean, I'm again coming back to the way how we bring work-based learning better into universities. I mean, I still come to this, well, meta level or like institutional level, where the question is, or maybe to put it different, what supports that universities engage in work-based learning? So I think this is something that a colleague from Greece, I think Jenny, was posing. So what, if we try to get work-based learning within our universities or getting stronger, what are maybe the key factors that we need to think of?
Yes, please. Thank you. I would like to congratulate Carol. Carol, it was so interesting, your presentation. I asked from Carmen if you can send us the presentation, because we may need that one for our projects, even for our teaching material for our students. It's very interesting. I'm actually now working as Vice President of the Center of Lifelong Learning, and I was wondering if we could recognize as work-based learning some courses there, and recognized in level 5, as you said, that we can, as universities, what we actually do is that we recognize some courses in our Lifelong Learning Center, but only for students who have already a bachelor degree. We don't recognize that one for students who don't have a bachelor degree, because according to the Greek system in the universities, and that happens, I think, the entrance system, yeah, you know how difficult it is. That happens in some other countries, as we discussed this matter with other professors. They don't allow students to enter in the university without national exams. So we have that problem. And only the open university in Greece can accept work-based learning and these courses and that. And my second question that has to be close to that one is, could we organize something like all open universities in Europe accept that form and admit that program from work-based learning that is more flexible, and incorporate that thing in as level 5?
So, thank you. Thank you, Jenny. I think there were a few points, Carol.
Yeah.
So you see what and how you can answer. I take the question of the Open University with me, because I think this is very important. Carol, please.
Yes, well, we had a centre in Athens, and we also had one in Cyprus on work-based learning. So and you're right, it's not just Greek quality assurance agencies that have put these rules, which, you know, it's difficult to see. But when we first started, which was I think the European Union started recognizing knowledge in terms of RPL in round about 2004, 2005. Before that, the KISATs, as it was in Cyprus, and the DICATSA in Greece, they wouldn't allow any RPL. They wouldn't allow it. They said it wasn't proper learning, but now they do. So then but they didn't like the work-based projects. They said that they weren't theorized enough. They said that they were well researched but not theorized enough. So I think these things actually take time. You know, people, quite rightly, I think quality assurance agencies, they err on the side of caution, but we just have to keep, you know, whittling away and get people in high positions on your side. You know, try and I feel so confident about work-based learning when it's done well, being a high quality degree, that when people understand what it is and don't assume what it is, i.e. this vocational thing which doesn't belong in universities, I think gradually things will change. But I like your open university idea. And then if everybody flocks to the open university, then the other universities will start thinking.
Well, thank you, Carol. There were questions and also issues around, and maybe I could bring that in about actually the educators. So on the one hand, the university staff, but also the staff, the people who work in the companies or at the workplace, and about the training for like the teachers. And you said already, I think there was this slide, what teachers need to have. And that's quite a lot, I may say. If I think of certain teachers at my own universities, they would say, well, what are you talking about? So I'm wondering, is there anything you would like to share with regard to the training? Or I think that came also from Romana, from the colleague from Romania, where how you could set up training, or how you could support these teachers, because it's a challenging way of supporting learners in work-based learning. Please.
Well, University of Chester actually set up a certificate course in teaching work-based learning. You mentioned workplace mentors, I think, or workplace teachers. I mean, that it can be done, different models have different ways of doing it. So you could actually, some people have got, if they're working with a large organization, for example, that have that staff development, big staff development departments, could help with the teaching and with the assessing. Or they could just have a mentor there who's supporting the colleague, but not necessarily be called a teacher, but mentoring. Or have no one in the workplace and just have it done by the university teachers. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. But the Chester examples, I did a project on this very subject once. They said that they got this certificate, that's 60 credits at level 6, I think, something like that. That's 60 UK credits, which I think is half or double, I can never remember. Anyway, so they put the workplace tutors and the higher education staff in the same workshop, and they found that that it was too difficult to mix the two communities together, that somehow the workplace people, they'll have to forgive me if I've got this a little bit wrong, felt slightly intimidated by the higher education staff, so that they did their certificate course separately, which is an interesting thought, that, you know, higher education lecturers, you know, are a particular kind of people with particular background and thoughts about learning, and the workplace trainers, you know, might have different ideas. I mean, they're all very valid, aren't they? And what we're trying to do is get these things kind of a bit more linked up, because it's just the one person who's the learner. So anyway, I think that's where we're at on that. But just to say that when we will take new people on in the work-based learning unit, it takes about a year for them to fully, for a full-time member of staff to fully understand all the different learning and teaching and assessments that they need to do, I'd say.
Well, thank you very much on that, Carol. And I maybe try, looking at the time, try to pose a last question. This also, of course, already looks a bit in the future. Yeah, and I think, I'm just looking at the chat right now. I think we can share afterwards also maybe some of the projects or things afterwards that you mentioned. We will do that also in our section. But I was now wondering, I mean, in Germany at the moment, there was there was some money and time also invested within the last years of like supporting universities to invest for new target groups for lifelong learning, and of course also work-based learning programs in different shapes. What I could see in this, I would say, project area, which of course was supported by money and staff, that there is a tendency of, and this is for Germany something very special, not to full degree programs, but more shorter programs that could be also stackable or having shorter parts. And I'm just wondering how you, with your broader view, see these developments. And maybe you want to say something on that. So a bit a look in the future or what you see. I think we will go more in depth on Friday. So people join us on Friday again, please. This is the carrot for Friday. But maybe you could say something on what you see in the developments, because I think at least for Germany, I could say we thought mostly about whole degree programs. I know that this is in the UK maybe also a bit different, but I was wondering how you see the developments now.
I think that's an excellent idea, the stackable aspects to work-based learning. And we do have all those secondary awards in the UK, like certificates, undergraduate certificate, diplomas, different kinds of higher level diplomas, 60 credits, 100 credits, 120, 180, and you can build your degree upon that. And I suppose the important thing is when you come to the higher level, the level 6, that you've got something which holds it all together. So it could be, it's got to be, a degree's got to be coherent. It's got to be about something. So it can't be completely full of bits and pieces of, that don't tangibly fit together. So that's why you need your learning consultancy hat on. It's another thing you become expert in is, how to build up something which has that coherence. And you'll find that as individuals, we're coherent, aren't we? I mean, most of us, we may have moved from one profession to another, but we've brought with us something from what the other one was. Doesn't matter if we used to be dancers and now we're engineers. You bring something with you, it's in you, and you bring out those things which are relevant and coherent. And then the final year has to be something, quite profound and fit for level 6. And it's the equivalent of a dissertation. It's probably a work-based project or 2, to get, if it's an honours degree, particularly, that it has to be put together. And so you become an expert as a work-based learning tutor on that also, how things fit together. What does the level look like? What does assessment at that level look like? You have this overview. It's the skills that you have to develop.
Thank you, Carol. I think that was how would you say, good last words. And I think there comes more this week. I may thank you very much for being with us today, for the masterclass, for sharing with us your enormous knowledge on both research and practice, I have to say, because Middlesex is well known for work-based learning and for degree apprenticeships. So, thank you to you. Thank you to the audience for listening, for sharing questions. We will have everything. The presentation will be in our UCAN section, I think. Carme is quite busy with that. And I may invite you all to join us during the week, so the next days, and on Friday again with Carol also for our discussion on the future of work-based learning. So have a good day, have a good afternoon, and see you within the next days. Bye.